The galaxy wasn't the biggest, strongest, or most advanced, but the ones who simply refused to quit. In a war that shattered worlds and bent the rules of combat, one alien commander learned the terrifying truth about humanity, not through their weapons but through their grit, laughter and chaos, and a will that would not break. This story will change the way you see strength forever. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and show a thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful story. The training hall at the Galactic Unity Academy buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of young cadets from dozens of different species sat in neat rows, their attention fixed on the massive stage at the front of the room. It was supposed to be just another lecture in their war history course, but something felt different today. The Academy had promised a special guest, and whispers had already started to fly. Most assumed it would be another decorated commander with long stories and longer speeches. They had no idea who was about to walk onto that stage. When the doors finally opened, the room fell quiet. A tall armored figure stepped into the light. His skin was a rough, deep green, covered in ridged scales marked with pale scars. His uniform was old but polished, bearing medals from campaigns most cadets had only read about in their history books. One of his 4 eyes remained shut, the eyelid scarred and sealed shut from a wound long healed. He moved slowly but with purpose, each step echoing in the silent hall. This was Captain Raynor Thal, a legend from the Orion Front. Many of the older cadets had studied his battles, but few had ever seen him in person. Even fewer had heard him speak. He reached the podium, adjusted the translator on his shoulder, and looked out at the audience. A few cadets shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, unsure of what was about to come. "You all know me as a soldier," Raynor began, his deep, rumbling voice translated into smooth galactic standard. "But today, I am not here to tell you about my victories. I am here to tell you about a mistake I made, one that nearly cost me everything." The cadets leaned forward, curiosity growing. Raynor paused for a moment, his gaze distant. "I once believed I understood war. I believed I had seen the limits of what a species could endure. I was wrong." He stepped away from the podium and began to pace slowly across the stage. 20 years ago, during the height of the Orion Front conflict, a new species joined, the Galactic Alliance. They called themselves humans. At the time, we didn't take them seriously. Small bodies, fragile bones, limited sleep cycles. They needed oxygen-rich environments, protective suits, even specific food types. Most of us thought they wouldn't last a week in combat. A few cadets chuckled, and Raynor allowed himself a faint, crooked smile. I laughed too, at first, but that laughter didn't last long. With a wave of his hand, the lights dimmed, and a hologram flickered to life behind him. It showed an old video recording, grainy, clearly taken in the heat of battle. A human ship, smaller than the others around it, darted through space. Larger enemy vessels closed in around it like a trap. "This footage is from a battle near the edge of the Dalaran Nebula," Raynor said. "The human ship you see here was outnumbered, damaged. It had every reason to retreat. Every tactical model we ran said it should have. But it didn't." The recording showed the human vessel accelerate, charging directly toward the enemy's command ship. They didn't retreat. They attacked, head-on. Gasps filled the hall. Even the instructors looked surprised. One cadet leaned forward, unable to tear her eyes from the screen. They discovered a flaw in the enemy's shield design. They could have used that information to escape, to survive. Instead, they sacrificed themselves to destroy 3 enemy ships and cripple a 4th. It made no sense to us at the time. The screen went dark. Raynor returned to the podium, his voice quieter now, almost reflective. "That day I began to understand what makes humans dangerous. Not their strength, not their weapons, but the way they think. The way they choose chaos over logic, risk over safety, sacrifice over survival." He paused again, letting the silence fill the room. "From that moment on, I started paying attention. What I saw in the months that followed changed everything I believed about war, about courage, and about fear." A low hum returned to the hall. whispers and glances passing among the cadets. The idea of fearing humans seemed absurd to them. Many had never even seen one up close. But Rayner's tone, his expression, left no room for doubt. He wasn't exaggerating. He wasn't trying to impress them. "I'm not here to scare you," he said finally. "I'm here to prepare you. Because understanding humans is no longer optional. It's survival." He took a drink from a worn metal flask, then stared out into the rows of cadets with his 3 remaining eyes. "In the next hour, I'm going to tell you the real story," he said. "Not the one you'll find in your data tablets. The story of how a species everyone ignored became the force that turned the tide of the war. The story of how I learned to fear them, and eventually to respect them more than any warrior I've ever known." The room was silent once again, but this time it wasn't due to confusion or disbelief. It was something else, something rare in a hall full of aspiring soldiers. It was awe. And as Rayner tapped the controls to begin the next recording, every cadet knew this was a story they'd never forget. Captain Rayner Thal remembered the exact moment his opinion of humans began to shift. It wasn't during a battle or a strategy session. It happened during what should have been a simple patrol, the kind he'd done 1,000 times. His vessel, the Vigilance Ray, was scanning a quiet region near the outer border of Allied space when they picked up a strange signal. Weak, irregular, and entirely unfamiliar. The crew assumed it was debris or an old satellite, but then they found it. A small ship drifting slowly, its power readings dangerously low and its life support systems barely functioning. Protocol demanded caution. The ship could be a trap. It could be infected, a swarm decoy, or worse. But Captain Thal, ever the professional, ordered a boarding party. They approached the ship with full armor and weapons ready. It was a compact vessel, unlike any they had ever seen. Patchy hull plating, a strange design, and clearly held together by more hope than engineering. The crew inside was clearly in trouble. What they found inside, however, was something no one expected. There were 5 humans on board, working frantically in a room full of wires, tools, and blinking warning lights. They weren't panicking, they weren't even worried. They were laughing. Rayner's first thought was that they'd lost their minds. Oxygen deprivation could cause that. Delusions, confusion, inappropriate behavior. But their vitals showed stable. Their mental patterns were clear. This wasn't madness. This was normal. The human in charge, a man named Nico Reyes, was sitting on the floor with 2 others, adjusting a tangled mess of tubing with a wrench that looked too small for the job. He cracked another joke and his crewmates chuckled in response. Another crew member, Mira, was brewing some strange-smelling liquid in a dented container they called a coffee pot. There was a calmness to them that Rayner couldn't understand. They were deep in danger, surrounded by systems that could fail at any second, and yet they acted as if they were just fixing a broken air vent at home. When Rayner entered the control room, Nico stood up, grinning beneath his sweat-streaked face. "You guys here to help or just watch the show?" he asked. Rayner, still processing the absurdity of it all, replied through his translator, "Your ship is failing. You require immediate evacuation." The humans glanced at each other. Mira shrugged. "Thanks, but we've almost got it." Rayner thought it was a joke, but Nico was serious. Their engine had been damaged by a micrometeor shower, and the entire power grid was offline. But instead of panicking, they were building a workaround. Out of food storage units, scraps of hull metal, and something sticky and silver they called duct tape. Rayner's team offered supplies and advanced tools, but the humans declined. "We've done more with less," Nico said. What amazed Rayner wasn't just the fact that the humans managed to restart their ship. It was how they behaved while doing it. They joked, they teased, they passed around mugs of their steaming drink and shared a strange snack called trail mix. Their bond, their humor, it kept them focused and alert, even as the oxygen levels dipped and the temperature dropped. They didn't need command protocols or external motivation. Their morale came from within, and just as Rayner was beginning to accept that these humans might actually fix their ship, a new signal appeared, an enemy probe, a swarm scout. It was scanning the region, no doubt searching for easy targets. The human vessel, barely functional and small, was the perfect choice. Raynor prepared to defend them, his crew armed the weapons, but Nico had another idea. "Let us handle it," he said. Raynor blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "You are outgunned, outnumbered, and your systems are unstable," Raynor pointed out. "Exactly," Nico replied with a grin. "They'll never see it coming." And incredibly, Raynor agreed. The humans rerouted the last bit of power into a patched-together engine booster and took off into a nearby asteroid belt. The swarm scout followed. Raynor watched, tense from his ship as the Wind Whisper darted through the field, using the asteroids as cover. The human crew guided the swarm ship deeper and deeper, moving with strange precision. Their small size and unpredictable turns gave them the advantage. Then, at the perfect moment, they triggered a timed pulse from their repaired engines, just enough to disorient the enemy sensors. An asteroid, the size of a small moon, slammed into the swarm ship. The explosion lit up space like a second sun. When the humans returned, they were battered but alive. Their ship, while barely holding together, was victorious. Raynor didn't speak for a long time. He just watched as the humans high-fived, cheered, and took celebratory sips of coffee. It was the first time Raynor saw humans not as allies or weak newcomers, but as something else entirely. Something unpredictable. Something dangerous in the best possible way. They turned their own weaknesses into weapons. They found joy in the face of death. They fought not just with tools and ships, but with spirit. That day, Raynor Thal learned that bravery wasn't always loud. Sometimes it sounded like laughter in a dying ship. The battle began before sunrise on the planet below, though in space, the light never changed. Commander Raynor Thal stood on the bridge of the Vigilance Ray, watching countless red signals blink onto the tactical map. The enemy was coming fast, more swarm ships than any of their simulations had ever prepared for. The Alliance fleet was badly outnumbered. They had tried to hold the line at the Draxian rings, but the swarm had outflanked them. Escape seemed like the only option. Every commander in the fleet was preparing to fall back. All but one. A small voice crackled through the command channel. It was human. "Retreat means they chase us down. We end it here." The voice belonged to Commander Jonah Ward of the human cruiser Ashlight. His tone was calm, his decision firm. Raynor had met Ward once before during a briefing. The man had seemed unremarkable, quiet, polite, average in height and build. But his mind, Raynor remembered, had a strange edge to it. Sharp in ways he hadn't understood then. Now Ward was suggesting something unthinkable. To stay, to fight, to win. Raynor almost responded with anger. It was reckless. It was madness. But then he looked again at the position of the enemy fleet, and something clicked. Ward wasn't choosing chaos. He had found a pattern. The swarm. Ships were protecting a cluster near the center of their formation, too well defended for it to be just another ship. Raynor understood. It was a control node, possibly a queen carrier. If it fell, the rest might scatter. Jonah Ward had already moved his ships into position. The Ashlight and two smaller human vessels began weaving through the debris field. They took fire from every direction, but they didn't stop. One of the ships exploded in a flash of orange light, but the others kept moving. Inside the Ashlight, everything shook. Gunner Toma had blood running down her forehead, but she kept firing. Pilot Aline shouted over the alarms, rerouting power through overloaded circuits. The crew moved like a single living thing, injured, tired, but focused. A piece of metal had lodged in Jonah's leg, but he stayed in his seat, teeth gritted, giving orders with blood staining his boot. Raynor's bridge officers watched in disbelief as the humans advanced through what should have been certain death. "They'll burn out before they reach the target," someone said, but Raynor wasn't so sure anymore. One by one, the human ships flickered and went dark. It looked like they were dying. Their power signatures vanished, their weapons offline. To the swarm, it appeared they were finished. But Raynor saw the truth in the silence. The ships weren't dead. They were hiding. With their systems off, they drifted through the chaos of the battlefield, indistinguishable from wreckage. The swarm ignored them. When they reached the Queen carrier, everything changed. The human ships powered back on for just a few moments, long enough to release every missile and cannon burst they had left. It was a surprise attack with no escape plan, a gamble, a final move. The carrier erupted in a violent shockwave, sending pieces of it flying in all directions. The swarm formations began to wobble, then they collapsed. Without orders, the ships hesitated, spun in circles, collided. The front line began to break, and for the first time in the long war, the Alliance pushed forward. Rayner didn't speak for a long time. His crew stared at the displays, mouths open. He watched the ashlight, damaged and drifting, somehow still moving, somehow still alive. Medical. Scans later showed the human crew had fought with injuries that should have put them in hospital beds. Toma had a cracked skull. Eileen's arm was broken in 2 places. Jonah had lost nearly a liter of blood. None of them had stopped. When Rayner finally boarded the ashlight to offer assistance, he found Jonah still in his seat, eyes half closed, but smiling. "Did it work?" he asked. Rayner nodded, unable to find the right words. That moment stayed with him long after the war. Not because of the victory, but because of what it revealed. Humans didn't fight like others. They didn't stop when it hurt. They didn't hesitate when the odds turned against them. They found a way, no matter how reckless, no matter how painful. And sometimes they won not because they were stronger or faster, but because they simply refused to give up. Rayner had served beside warriors from dozens of species. He had seen courage, sacrifice, and discipline. But what humans brought to the battlefield was different. It was raw, emotional, and terrifyingly effective. They didn't just survive under pressure. They thrived in it. They found fire in the worst moments and used it to light a path forward when everyone else saw only darkness. That day at the Draxian Rings wasn't just a turning point in the war. It was a turning point in Rayner's understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. And deep inside, he knew something else too. If the humans ever became the enemy, no species in the galaxy would be truly ready for what was coming. Captain Rayner Thal had seen battles that shattered moons and burned skies, but nothing haunted him more than the silence of the long night. It wasn't a single fight. It was a test of patience, endurance, and the quiet determination to outlast the enemy. The swarm had changed tactics. Instead of attacking strongholds or war fleets, they focused on something more vital: supply lines. Without food, fuel, or medicine, even the strongest army would fall. The stellar spine, a chain of supply stations stretching across 40 light-years, became the war's most important battleground. And it was there that Rayner saw what humans could truly do when the lights stayed dark and the days stretched endlessly. The Alliance had few ships to spare. Defenses were thin, and the swarm knew it. They launched coordinated attacks on multiple supply posts, forcing the Allied forces to stretch themselves to the breaking point. Rayner commanded one of the central defense teams, responsible for a cluster of stations halfway down the line. Most of his crew could stay alert for maybe 20 hours at a time. After that, they needed rest, food, recovery. But the humans were different. Rayner had 3 human officers assigned to his sector: strategist Sarah Lynn, engineer Ulrich, and communications officer Drev. They didn't take long breaks. They didn't demand long sleep. Instead, they rotated in short bursts, 20-minute naps here and there, a few hours in a corner with their eyes shut, and then back on their feet. They drank strong black liquid called coffee. They consumed strange, sugary snacks and something they referred to as energy bars. Their behavior didn't follow any standard military protocol, but it worked. As the days turned into weeks, the stress began to wear down every other crew. But the humans stayed sharp. When asked how, Ulrich simply said, "We've trained for this since birth. We call it cramming for finals." Sarah added, "Also, retail jobs. You ever worked a 12-hour shift on Black Friday?" No one knew what that meant, but Raynor was starting to realize that the human way of coping wasn't madness. It was experience. Their entire culture from childhood seemed to prepare them for long hours, little rest, and high pressure. But what happened during the second month truly changed Raynor's understanding of the species. The swarm had sent a dreadship, massive, heavily armored, impossible to destroy with the limited weapons in the sector. The plan was simple: isolate the supply chain, disable key stations, and starve out the Alliance. The only problem was, the humans didn't follow that plan. Instead of engaging directly, they chased the dreadship. Sarah proposed what she called a persistence hunt. Raynor had never heard of it, and when she explained it, he thought she was joking. "We'll just follow it," she said. "We won't let it rest. We'll hound it until it runs out of options." And that's exactly what they did. A single human ship, the Tempest Root, with a crew of 7, began tracking the dreadship. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't attempt boarding. They just stayed close enough to be noticed, never far enough to be ignored. Whenever the swarm ship tried to power down or hide, the humans closed in again. They took turns sleeping in their chairs. They passed control of the ship from hand to hand like a relay race. When one person started to fade, another took over. For 18 straight days, they did not stop. The swarm dreadship, built for heavy assault and not long-term, escape finally failed. Its power reserves dropped. Its system shut down. The humans boarded it and, without firing a single shot, captured one of the most powerful vessels in the enemy's fleet. They had worn it down like a predator wears down its prey. Raynor watched, the footage stunned. The swarm, so feared for its adaptability, had been outlasted. Not outgunned, not outwitted, simply outlasted. In the final weeks of the campaign, more human crews adopted similar methods. They tracked enemy scouts across star systems, harassed larger fleets without ever engaging, and kept supply posts operational under constant stress. When one crew rotated out, another rotated in. They shared tactics, tips, and schedules. They called it powering through. One crew even printed a sticker for their ship's engine room that read, "Powered by coffee and stubbornness." Raynor had always believed that strength and speed were the most important traits in a soldier, but the humans introduced something else entirely: resilience. A slow, steady fire that burned no matter how cold or long the night became. Their ships were not the strongest, their bodies not the toughest, and their weapons not the most advanced. But their will was unmatched. When the war finally turned in the Alliance's favor, it wasn't because of a single great battle. It was because of hundreds of small victories, long nights and quiet moments where humans simply refused to give in. They had shown the galaxy that sometimes victory doesn't belong to the fastest or the fiercest. Sometimes it goes to the one who stays in the fight the longest. Years later, Raynor stood once again at the academy, telling this story to a new group of cadets. He held up a small patch, worn, stained, and stitched with crude letters. It had been a gift from Sarah Lynn after the long night. It read, "Still awake." He looked at the young faces in front of him and smiled. "If you ever doubt humans," he said softly, "remember that patch. Because while others rest, they keep going. And in the end, they will still be awake."